Once I kind of get something in my mind and I see the potential, I get obsessive and overly ambitious and kind of just dive in with both feet. And like, now I'm in. And you know that about me. So it's like, if I say yes to this, this is likely going somewhere.
So I actually have to be careful. And even like planting seeds in your mind, but it also, I can use this superpower for my well-being, like the fact that we have a hot tub currently filling up because I planted that seed of like, we should maybe get a hot tub. And then
walk away.
Yeah.
It looks like hot tub.
Well, within a week, I'm getting like Facebook Marketplace. Like, here's a hot tub. What kind would you want? What size? And he's researching what kind. Do you know if you want chlorine, bromine, salt water? And I was like, I have literally only thought as far as a hot tub would be nice.
I don't want to buy a new one because they're so bloody expensive.
We don't need to talk about a hot tub.
So anyway, all of that. So yeah, that's.
So all that to say, his brain's like, whoo, hot tub world.
Welcome to another episode of Efficient by Design podcast. Today, my guest is Tianna Reamer, my wife, and co-hosting with me is my business partner, Mark. So to set the stage a little bit, we are going to kind of pick up the story of the evolution of Akribis Leather with my wife's perspective. So a little backstory. We've been married now for almost 20 years. We've got 4 kids, and we have built a house together from the ground up. We've also done a significant renovation on a 70s home. Tianna did the bookkeeping for my construction company for how many years? 12?
14? Something like that.
Yeah, so she was doing the books and payroll and benefits and all that stuff. And then there came a time where we actually transitioned to a bookkeeper to try and free up
that was
your time.
with the leather company. That wasn't.
So you did it the whole time with construction?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. See, I don't remember stuff.
This is why I'm here.
So we ended up transitioning to having a bookkeeper to kind of, as things were growing, and there was 2 parallel running companies, and then we brought in a bookkeeper to kind of take on the lion's share, the entire share of the bookkeeping side of things.
Yeah, with a lot of the companies, it's just a lot more complicated than a construction company too.
Yeah. Why don't you actually speak to that quick, just in regards to the transition from you bookkeeping to Danielle?
Sure. Yeah. So with our construction company, because of how you had structured your company, we only ever sold labor. And so that simplifies the bookkeeping a lot. So we didn't have any materials that were going through our business. That was all separate and done by the homeowners or the developers that you were working for. So
that makes so much sense. The whole time I've been like, how did you do it? I'm like, every little nail.
Now you realize it was like nothing. It doesn't.
Well, not
so easy.
Tiana's like, come on, man.
It was fine.
And just for context,
it was never stressful.
The construction company, what we provided was labor for concrete and framing.
Yeah.
Right. So I was asked numerous times to do start to finish, get licensed. Because I actually managed the projects that I worked on. So I would take on. I would end up calling for inspections and ordering all the material and scheduling pump trucks. And like I managed the projects because that gave me control of that whole operation. I'd be responsible for it. And things went smooth. There's more work for me, but I basically functioned as a general contractor on a project, but only actually charged for labor of concrete and framing. So that was what we provided.
Yeah. And it grew like I don't have a degree in bookkeeping, not degree. I don't know what you would get, a certificate in bookkeeping, whatever you take to be like an official bookkeeper. But I like math. So when I was in university before I dropped out, I was doing a math major. So just working with numbers I'm really comfortable with. And so I was able to self-taught along with the helpline of the CRA, called them a lot and asked a lot of questions.
That's interesting to me. Yeah, I get. Yeah. I mean, it's unfamiliar territory for me, so that's why I'm like, okay. So when you would buy like a box of screws or something like that, you would just send the receipt to the builder, or you kind of had a different line for this. We don't need to get all into.
That's interesting. So basically, I would provide. That was part of what I would supply would be fasteners. That's pretty typical here.
At first, you didn't. And
for
it
the
was
first while.
Annoying because then you'd have like a leftover box, and then what do you do? And so it got easier just to say, you know what, fasteners are included. Whatever's left over, we just take to the next job.
Yeah. And this is also back in like the early-ish 2000s. And so, the technology we have now and the online systems and the hour tracking, like that stuff didn't exist on online, in applications. I mean, I was using a flip cell phone and we had
Excel.
paper timesheets.
Remember the Razor phone?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Jeez, man. And then the BlackBerry.
I never had one.
Yeah. So we went from like all hard copy stuff. So I think, for the amount of bookkeeping I do now for the leather company, which is all online through apps, super easy, intuitive, all online. I think back to Tianna doing it, longhand, hard copies, reading my employees' chicken scratch on timesheets. That was
probably the hardest part.
job. Yeah.
Come on, Chad.
Yeah, literally, we had a Chad. But he was great. We love Chad.
Well, Chad again is my wrong-handed, right? My both hand. He's not right or left-handed, and I just tell people he's just awful with both hands. Wow. He'll write. He'll laugh at this, but he would write either left or right-handed, and it'd be chicken scratch with both. He's like, I can write either. No, you kind of can't write with either, actually.
Yeah, but as far the bookkeeping goes, I just kind of learned as I went. It's interesting. You don't need to charge GST until a certain amount and things like that. So when I needed to, I would learn that piece. So I was able to kind of learn it incrementally, and and it just worked. But it was very evident very quickly with the leather company that this was a whole different ballgame. Right, you're importing goods and exporting goods, and you're now selling a product. You have
selling
inventory, all the provinces
taxes.
and taxes, and all of a sudden I thought it was like I was pushed off a ledge, in the ocean, where all of a sudden there's those drop offs. I was like, whoa, this is like way different. And so that's when we brought in someone else, and
that was pretty early on, because at that point, like I didn't have any employees yet. I was doing everything by myself, and it just you became aware that, oh, this next phase is going to require all this extra work and knowledge that you don't have. Yeah. So very early, you kind of saw the writing on the wall. Like that's we talked about that, bringing someone else in.
Yeah. So that was great. So then my involvement just shifted a bit with the leather company. So now not so much in the books, still involved in other ways, but quite minimally.
Yeah.
At this point.
Well, that was one of the things I remember very early on when I started dabbling in this, and getting a sewing machine. And she kind of, I think, saw the potential for this to become something. And it was very, very early on. She's like, this is all fine and great. I'm in support of everything. This is great. But I will never sit behind a sewing machine. That was made clear to me right away. Yeah.
So personality-wise, Luke is more introverted and likes to kind of work with his hands, and he can just be in his own zone and just like have a full day on his own working on stuff, and it's like super life-giving. And for me, that would suck the life out of me, like just having to like zone in on a manual task without being more social. And so I was curious if he was like, hey, we can like do this together. And I wanted to be like, I don't want to do that.
Which is a little bit hard to be like, but it would be with me. We work well together, don't we? And then he's like, but I don't want to do that sort of work. Okay, so to kind of jump back a little bit in regards to the transition, or when you saw the twinkle in my eye in regards to tool belts, what was that?
Right.
It says framing full time, and then I'm talking about trying to replace my tool belt.
For 2 years.
Okay, so give your timeline and experience of observing me.
There's also some marriage counseling here. So what are you going to tell? I'll ask some specific questions in a few minutes.
So sometimes the reality of Luke is his like time frame awareness is sometimes low. And so even to remember that it was 2 years of him struggling to find the perfect tool belt. So I got to hear for 2 years about, why is there not a tool belt like XYZ? Like, why don't they have this feature? And why don't they make them like this? And I was becoming more invested in tool belts than I ever wanted to be. And their features. Like date night. Yeah. And so, Luke had spent a few years buying and returning and trying to figure out how to find the perfect tool belt. And so when he first came across a upholstery sewing machine in the classifieds, and was like, you know what? I can buy this. Apparently it's a really good deal. I've talked to someone. I could like sew my own tool belt and then sell this machine, and I'll have the perfect tool belt. Like, what do you think if I buy this little sewing machine? And then, get rid of it later. And I was like, if this is going to solve the tool belt like dilemma of the last few years, then yes, please buy this machine.
Little did you know, like fast forward a few years, we have a whole warehouse of it.
Yeah, but it was literally because he was so passionate about finding a good tool belt, and like Luke's MO is efficiency and why like things needlessly being more difficult than they need to be.
And I'll pause you there for a second.
Sure.
In the sense that it's a bit of a red flag that goes up. That whole process wasn't me saying there are no good tool belts on the planet. So for instance, there was nothing that I personally identified with that would be perfect for me, but I would give credit to the fact that there are several other high-end good tool makers out there, but they didn't really tick all the boxes for the way that I wanted to work, the way I wanted my tools and fasteners, the materials I wanted to use. There was nothing that fit that precise vision that I had. But I would say that, the other companies out there, the high-end companies, I have nothing bad to say about them. They've all have their place. With that caveat, carry on.
Look at that, so respectful.
I know. Yeah, which is a tricky thing to hear when you're like, so there's good tool belts out there, so just buy one. So he was like, these are great, but not what I'm looking for. And I think in your mind, because you're the kind of person that will put in the effort to create something, even if it's just for your own use, like for your own enjoyment, I really enjoyed the creative process as well. So even the thought of creating the tool belt was appealing to you almost more like a hobby. Like, oh, I'd actually enjoy making this, and then it would be what I want, and I would solve my problem and kind of like not kill two birds with one stone, but enjoy the process. So it was actually like an appealing task to take on, not like a laborious, like, oh, I gotta make myself my own tool belt because there's not a good tool belt out there. He was like, I'm actually intrigued by the idea of making my own tool belt. And then also the satisfaction of like, I made this, it's exactly what I want. Awesome. Like, so that part of it too, like, I don't know if you've shared this on other podcasts so far, but like Luke has made himself his own guitar. And it's not because there's not good guitars out there, right? It's not because there's not great guitars out there. It's because he was intrigued by the process of what it takes to make a guitar and to just see what it's like to create one and then have one that he's made, right? And it turned out beautiful and it sounds great, which you didn't know, right? How it was going to turn out, because that's a pretty intense process making a guitar. But you enjoy those kind of processes, which is why you're a builder, because you like using your hands and making stuff. So it wasn't just about, all tool belts are out there are bad. It was, I'm intrigued by the process of making them. I think this could be an enjoyable project. What do you think about me? Buying this machine and then selling it when I'm done. And then, hey, I've solved the thing I've been trying to figure out for the last few years. So it was a pretty easy yes.
What made it, so from there you made your own, but then it wasn't quite perfect, so you wanted to keep trying. Was that how because then it evolved from there. It wasn't like just a sewing machine. Then you ended up,
Well, again, a couple things come to mind. I mean, Ted talks about this, becoming a bit of a hobby. And I wouldn't say that I looked at it that way. I thought the end goal is to have a tool belt that will serve me perfect. And I will enjoy the process of getting there, but I'm not trying to develop a like parallel interest and a lifetime, love of leathercraft stuff.
No.
Right?
Or even a company for that matter.
No, not at all.
That time.
Not at all. So that was kind of my obsession, was like trying to get this thing that works great and I would be happy with, and then wrap it up. Like with my guitar that I built, I'm like, I could have, endeavored to build a luthier shop and build all the jigs that you should have to do this repeatably. But I'm like, no, I'm going to actually build one. I'm going to do all kinds of Frankenstein jigs and do this in a really kind of odd way so that I can actually efficiently get one built in a reasonable time frame, and then it's finished and I've got a nice guitar to show for it. And it is, for anybody who's watching and listening, it's an acoustic guitar, not an electric. The difference in constructing those two instruments is extremely different. So it took a long time, but it was a huge process. So having the end product was what I was after. So
what are you laughing at?
Because it'd be funny if we like put up a photo and it was like this janky, ugly guitar.
No, it's actually beautiful.
I know. It's like that's what's expected, but you'd be like, hey guys, if you're wondering, it's an amazing. It's like it's not that kind of guitar, and we show it, and it's like. It's like glue coming out the sides,
and it's got its quirks and stuff. But from looking at it, it does look nice.
And it has that one spot where
there's a few stories about that
chisel
guitar.
jumped or whatever it was, and you're like, no, put a big gouge in it.
Yeah, Yeah, that sucked.
Big. I bet you I couldn't find it, but maybe, I don't know.
So yeah, and the other thing to mention too is that my experience with any kind of sewing of any sort existed in grade 8, my home ec class, where I built a pair of boxer shorts and a pillow.
We still have that pillow.
I thought you were going to say
think
we
we
still
got rid
have
of it.
those boxer
Actually, I think
shorts.
I might have finally got rid of it because I was like,
The filling was getting all lumpy and it was gross.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my sewing experience. So when it came time to build a tool belt, I'm like, okay, I have a sewing machine that will sew through a reasonably thick amount of leather, but not like the stuff we do now. But I'm like, I don't have a clue where to start. So I'm like, where's my old pairs of work pants? I'll cut them apart and start trying to figure out how to make a pocket. You know, like here's a rectangular piece of material. Let's fold it in half, sew the edges, and flip it inside out. Like the most crude, basic, elementary little sleeve pocket you can imagine. And then I started looking at, okay, I want to create this sort of a shape and to hang this way. And I want these areas to be reinforced and strong because I've worn tool belts and see where they fail. And so it's like, it probably took me, it was 2 or 3 months to have a single bag that its geometry functioned and worked in a way that I was like, this is something to work from. This is like a foundational part of this.
yeah. And I mean, we would be, out on a date night, those rare date nights at that stage when our kids were so little. But I remember being out and like most people will, lose their husband to like a sports game on a screen in a restaurant or whatever. And no screen necessary for Luke to lose him. All of a sudden he'd be like kind of off in his world. I'm like, hey, want to come back to our date? What you doing in that brain? And he'd be like, oh, I was just thinking about if I like made this tab a little bit longer, I could like do this. And I'm like, okay, like that's cool. Like, but again, it's just his mental energy whenever you had free space would go towards the belts in this time or the belt I should say in this time. Yeah. And then even once you built it, so here's the thing, you built it, but then and you wore it at your job site. But then you start to notice, maybe I'd change this a little bit, and maybe I'd change this a little bit, and then you could see improvement within your own design, and you still have the capability to make another one. So you're like, I'm gonna try to change that. Yeah. So he'd pass his belt along, once he built a second version to one of his employees, and because they were interested in them, right? And then you'd try again. And so again, it wasn't to make tool belts for other people. It was still just trying to perfect the design for what he was looking for.
Yeah, and then not waste the one that was already functional.
Yeah. And so again, at this point, it was but it was very kind of like with your making your guitar there. Like it wasn't the most efficient way because he wasn't planning to reproduce this. It was, sitting on the floor with a utility knife, cutting out thick leather. And it was fine. It wasn't like you complained about it, but you're like, this definitely is not the most efficient way to do this. I remember you saying things like that.
Do you enjoy were you enjoying the process? Well, parts of it?
Well, yeah, and like there's so much of this, like every aspect of it, that I can draw parallels to my building background, to construction. Like in like every way, from the construction of the tool belt to training staff and efficiency and workflow and all of those things. Like a big part of my brain that I'd exercised through construction was that conceptual, imaginative part of your mind where you're trying to solve real world practical problems before you have to build it on the job site. So I've done everything from like entry level spec houses to multi-million-dollar high-end customs. So you get to build a huge variety of different styles of homes. And there was some very intricate stuff that we built over the years. And some of them where there's like, elliptical radius ceilings intersecting a radius archtop window intersection. And so you have like radius and elliptical intersections that you've got to frame out of wood. And so I'd lay in bed at night sometimes, not stressed. I'm imagining, okay, what's my process for having these two radiuses intersect, and how do I scribe this to fit here? And I don't want to have this like janky, crappy conclusion. I want this to be like dialed so that when the way that I always built was basically to set up the frame so that the subtrades that followed me just loved coming after us. Yeah. Like that was always my pursuit. Like I want the drywallers to be like, oh, this couldn't have been better. This is such a
I love following Akribis. Yeah,
exactly. And when guys are putting the flooring down, like I got to the side and I had like I had to do a 3/4 inch rip down the entire side of the house. It was like bang on perfect. Like it just made it so easy. And electricians making sure that their boxes are spaced off properly because we did the correct amount of studs and cripples and spaces for plumbers for their plumbing to work where toilets are, and stacking up our studs and our joists so that ductwork runs can flow. Like all of these little things.
Until HVAC comes and they're like, I could probably cut through that.
That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, there's times where you like go through all this energy to cater to these guys, and then they come and like run their drops in the completely wrong space and butcher things and chop bearing walls apart. But that whole like kind of conceptual mind where you're trying to like figure stuff out, I really enjoyed that. That like I'm thinking if I do this and this way and this way, then this will work. Oh, I got it. Yeah. Oh, excited now. And you'll see like that's something that my staff see in the shop here. Well, I'll have an idea, and I mean sometimes you try to execute it, it doesn't work, and it's discouraging, frustrating. But with the amount of experience I've got doing it, I'd say more often than not, my first attempt now is usually fairly good. And the odd time it's like it's one try and it works. It's super satisfying. So there's kind of this gratification in like taking a thought of something and actually bringing it to reality and having it function like that kind of creation, practical, real, tangible kind of creation is super satisfying. On a job site, you show up to a job site and here's a truckload of material sitting on the ground. I'm going to organize that now into this beautiful structure. Here's a pallet full of leather all rolled up. Now it's a practical, wearable, functional piece of kit that someone's going to use, and they're going to be excited because it works so well for them. So that's super appealing to me. I geek out over that.
To you, yeah. This is where we're different. To you. I'm like, I just want the thing at the end. I don't want to put in all the work and the trial and error or any of that. I just want to be like, this is what I envision. I just want it to appear right there.
So what's your now perspective on, when I'm framing full time, all of a sudden now I'm adding in this other variable of playing tool belts.
I mean, you're a pretty intentional guy, so it wasn't like you were dropping balls left, right, and center when it came to our family. I have pretty distinct memories of as you're sitting down there with the utility knife cutting, our kids are down there doing their home reading, or you've got the spelling list sitting beside you on the floor and you're quizzing them on their spelling words and stuff. So you weren't like, peace out on the family, I'm going to go work on leather. You were like trying to incorporate and make sure you weren't dropping balls there too. So I appreciated that it wasn't like, I'm choosing this over this. Yeah.
Right. And for context right now, our kids currently are, let's get this up, 11, 12, 15, 17.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, I did.
Yeah.
So they were 6 years younger then. I'm not doing the math right now.
Yeah, 7 even, I think.
7 almost? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so those things were still happening, which thank you, by the way, for making sure those things still happen through that. And it makes it easier to cheer you on and support you and be like, yeah, go for it. Because it's not like, I think for sure there was things that our family has sacrificed to get this all going, but it wasn't as detrimental as it maybe could have been if you weren't as thoughtful to make sure that you weren't dropping those balls with our family. So that was great. And because of the way your brain works, you naturally always want to teach our kids stuff. So you were like, hey, let me show you how this machine works. And also like, don't put your finger there because that's death for your finger. So you've always invited them into, whether it was, even in construction or you're working on stuff on our home or whatever, into like, hey, do you want to learn how this works? And teaching them that. So with leather, it was the same. Like,
and not that they've all been keen to learn. I'd invite lots and there's like, don't care, not interested.
Yeah.
I know sometimes I have these moments where I'm like, oh, they're going to love this. And they're like, I'm like, that's it.
Can I go now?
Like, oh,
yeah. Can I go now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then sometimes it was, again, doing what they needed in the moment, or if they wanted to like read out loud to you to practice their reading, then you were like, yeah, come on down.
A lot of that early time too was, I think the time I'd put in was early in the morning.
Yep.
Like we'd start work on the job site at 7:30. And so I was for a while getting up early, and probably by 5 or so, I'd be working on the tool belt stuff. I'm like, this is the time that I've got where I can actually focus on it. And that wasn't all the time, but that was kind of one of the periods of time I could actually access to be able to focus on it and not be a burden on the family.
Yeah. I don't remember that too much because I was sleeping.
Yeah. So at this point, this is like, you're still making them for yourself. You're still trying to perfect it.
Yeah.
You've been handing some of the,
Yeah, his crew was a decent size at the time, so we had lots of people to like, and even you would say, try this one, because they had different needs too. So then you got intrigued with the idea of,
making them for
Chad,
your
your
guys.
wrong-handed guy, being like, oh, well, what would Chad need? And do you find what you're looking for out there? And well, I can make you one. Like all of a sudden you're realizing like I have the ability while I have this machine, before I sell it, I can help make a belt for you. And you found that kind of fun. So then you were figuring out what your guys liked and what they were hoping for in a belt and making them custom ones. And even like to care for them and as gifts, you were like, oh, I can like show them my appreciation by making them this belt. So it was sort of like as a gift mentality for a while too.
Yeah.
But at the time you were working at a pretty big development in Penticton there, and other trades and people started to notice these belts that more and more of your crew were wearing. And so there started to be some interest and intrigue, and people were asking like, hey, where'd you guys get those, right? Is that kind of what was happening next?
That kind of clicked and you're like, maybe I should get a clicker press. Because I feel like to go from having a sewing machine that's like a pain because it's not fully set up to then get a clicker press or then get a better sewing machine.
I think it was the better sewing machine was first.
Yeah, well, if I jump back for a minute, like when originally I needed to replace my tool belt, at the very, very beginning, right away I was like, could I make my own? Before I even did all the research to look around, I'm like, what would it take to make my own tool belt? That could be cool. And I researched for a couple of weeks, sewing machine, clicker press, kind of like educated myself. Like, here's like the base. If this is something you're ever gonna do, this is what you would need. And within that period of time, like, oh, I need to drop like 30K to be able to build myself a tool belt, to have the machinery, materials, rivets and stuff I need. Like, Kate, back burner, not even.
Yeah,
like,
you went into like a local saddlery and just asked lots of questions.
Yeah, called around and looked at stuff online. So then when it came time to start moving forward with it, then it was like, okay, I know the equipment that I would need for this to carry on if I'm going to do this more.
So that was the moment that you had a bit of a click. You're like, oh, maybe I should do this.
Well, and you also enjoyed it. Like, again, he enjoyed the creating. He enjoyed that people had different things that they were looking for. You were trying to figure out what's the most like universal. Like what if you're like, your average framer, this is what you want. If you're,
Let's say it was all kind of a means to an end.
Yeah.
But the end kept getting farther away.
Yes. And then,
right?
but then you sorry, I'm lack for words here. You kind of more thought of it as like a side hustle. You were like, something I enjoy. And it was kind of like hobby. It kind of switched into hobby mentality where you were like, I enjoy the process. Maybe this could be like a hobby where, hey, people, like the odd person wants to buy a belt from me. And it pays for itself. And that was kind of one of the key things actually that he would throw out there of like, how about, this is like the new proposal. How about I keep this machine, right? But the money that comes from it, in a sense, pays us back for it. And so that we've, in a sense, sold it back. But now it's its own little hobby entity. And if I can make money through it, then I can use that money to buy some equipment to make this a little more efficient so that I can enjoy it a bit more and not like, sit on the floor and use, the blades and that kind of thing to cut them out.
The moment that there was the twinkle in my eye, if I'd called it that, was when we were working at Sendero Canyon, this big development that we were building in. And so we were the primary concrete framing contractor in that development, but there was other framers that ended up coming in, and the development's a 230 lot subdivision, which we ended up building about 2/3 of. And there ended up being, 70 to 100 tradespeople on that site all the time, from roofers to drywallers, other framing companies and excavators and everything. And there was a friend of mine, another framer named Johnny, and one of his employees was a guy named Joe, great, big, tall, skinny guy. And he had seen my belts, and we got on really well with the other crews there. And he came by at one point. He's like, "Hey, would you make me one of those?" And that was the first time that someone approached me and was like, "I would pay for something like that if you'd make me one." So that was where I took that on and was using my little sewing machine, and I kept trying to take my little sewing machine and treat it like a big sewing machine, and putting heavier thread and bigger needles and just pushing it to its limits and breaking things. So to the point that I'm wearing safety glasses because needles are exploding in my face.
Yeah, and kids can't now sit by you.
Yeah, and I'm getting frustrated because now I'm like, there's a better way. And I know what the better way is, but it costs money. Is this a step that we're going to take at some point? So that's when
especially when you're used to tools of the trade being on, and you just
you know how to.
Oh
yeah, exactly. Like I know that there's something that does this well.
Yeah.
And if it's out there, there's time and a place also. I mean, here's a good analogy. When we're doing foundations, there's a couple tools that I was tempted to purchase. So one of them was a Hitachi rebar, electric rebar cutter and bender. So instead of having to manually bend and cut rebar with a variety of other kind of lame tools, you could buy this Hitachi electric bender, and it would bend all your L's, and you could actually shear metal with it. But they were about $2,000, and they would typically only last about a year. They need a big rebuild. And so I was like, that'd be nice, but after not too long, it's going to be a problem, and I don't know if I can justify the cost. So we'll just kind of carry on in this other manner for now, and maybe down the road when they perfect the machine, it'll become justifiable. So there was lots of tools that we could have got at times that I'm just like, it won't pay for itself. We'll have a short-term benefit for a long-term headache. And maybe we'll end up paying more for it, and the maintenance won't justify the time that's saved, right? So again, that's a pretty typical issue in any industry. But the sewing machine was another one of those things. Like, I can make do with this. Where's the threshold where it's justifiable to take that next step?
Well, and some of your designs developed too, where the amount of layers that you wanted to go through, you were having to like adjust your design because you're like, I can't go through that many layers. So you were kind of hit this wall where he's like, the ideal design would actually have, I don't know what it was, this many layers of leather, and this machine just literally can't handle it. Yep. And so it actually became a barrier for you. And so there was a point where it was a pretty clear decision, right? Like, we're either going to go down the path where you're going to maybe make this little side hustle thing
properly.
Properly, and do it, efficiently, or it's going to remain a hobby, but you're not going to be able to do it to the best of your ability, in a sense, is how you figured out how to do this, which in my mind is like, Luke will not thrive.
Well, I was going to say, I'm like, knowing your personality, knowing my personality too, I'd be like, I'm already this far. Like, we're doing this. But then that's when the proposals start coming. Right?
Well, it was at that moment where I'm trying to build this tool belt for Joe, was his name, right? And I'm trying to backstitch, and I can't. And at that moment, I was like, am I doing this?
Yeah, what am I doing?
Or am I not doing this? Either I'm wrapping this up. I'm not going to do this half-ass and be unhappy with my product. I'm either going to wrap this up and sell this stuff and be done with this, or I'm going to carry on and make the appropriate sacrifices and investment to take the next step forward that it will remove the barriers I'm currently dealing with.
And this is after, I don't know if it's up to a year now, but this is after many months of him.
Probably a year.
Yeah, like working with the leather, creating some tool belts, getting pretty excited about your designs and how it's going.
Also starting to, at this time with Sendero, I had been building into my leadership of my team, and I was starting to be able to free myself up a little bit. So now I'm like not having to be on the job site, all the time. I've actually got some margin now.
Yeah. Do you think this is what pushed you to start to free yourself up?
No, that was, which I've talked about in other podcasts, that started actually at Chadwell's build with Chad and Lance, and that whole situation of like having to intentionally draw back a bit to build into them, because I was so prone to micromanage my projects and be control of everything. And there came a point where I became aware that was not really respectful and building into my employees, my guys that had potential. And I actually for me to actually grow this company and honor them, I need to actually start stepping away, giving them authority and responsibility, which will build confidence in them. They'll start being able to take on crews and projects themselves, and it actually frees me up, grows the company. I can then come into a supporting role.
And so that's when you weren't in the development, you had houses kind of in different spots, and it was hard to be everywhere at once too, right?
And we're kind of bringing on more people, and so that was kind of an intentional change then. So I'd kind of staged that in my business practice already. So when that time came with the leather company, I'm like, I've actually got the infrastructure already in place that allows me to start being a little bit more absent.
And I think for you, it probably was
incredible in that space in particular. Because even when you talked about that in the previous podcast, of you started when somebody called out that your guys showed up but they weren't making decisions, or they were afraid to make decisions, and then that shifted your leadership.
No, I was gonna say, I think as well, you were starting to feel like if you were to continue down this path, it was going to more significantly infringe on our family time and on the rest of our life. And so you had to make a decision with, can I step back a little bit in my time from the construction company while still managing it from home, right? Like you're available, you go in when needed, but can I take some hours and dedicate them during the week to these tool belts, and is it worth it? So you're trying to balance that out. And so I actually remember standing on the stairs when you gave me the pitch for the harness stitcher. Yeah, for the heavy duty sewing machine. And I remember, because Luke doesn't come to ask anything unless he's like done his homework and he's thought through like my possible responses, and then he's got like a response for those responses is usually how it feels. I don't know if this is super intentional, but usually how it feels. So that, and not that he's like trying to manipulate, but he just wants to be really prepared for how the conversation, I guess, will go. And so I remember feeling like, whoa, like he was really prepared, like more than usual prepared for this conversation and my possible reactions to putting out, a few $1,000s for this machine, which was a significant investment for us. Like at that time, when I'm just thinking about all the things we had going on in life and things we were dealing with, it was a sacrifice at the time to make this investment. And so like it wasn't,
which I was aware of.
Yes, which you were aware of. Like we felt it personally. Yeah. And so but I remember being like actually really impressed with like your approach and how in a sense I could just see how much you wanted it. Right? And how much you'd been enjoying it and how you had thought about like our family and the dynamics and how you're going to spend your time and what this investment was going to look like and how the money was going to work and this is what it was going to cost, but this is what you think you could make, and in a sense pay us back in this amount of time. And so part of me was like, I would be cruel to say no. like this is life-giving to you at this point, right? And like
this is after you've experienced like selling a couple guys and they were like, oh, you sell 10 of these and then all of a sudden that thing is paid for.
Well, and a big part of that kind of groundswell of motivation, excitement was that once I get, and you can speak to this, there's multiple areas of my life where this is the case. Once I kind of get something in my mind and I see the potential, I get obsessive and overly ambitious and kind of just dive in with both feet. And like, now I'm in. And you know that about me. So it's like, if I say yes to this, this is likely going somewhere.
So I actually have to be careful. And even like planting seeds in your mind, but I can use this superpower for my well-being, like the fact that we have a hot tub currently filling up because I planted that seed of like, we should maybe get a hot tub. And then
walk away. Yeah. And Luke's like, hot tub.
Well, within a week, I'm getting like Facebook Marketplace. Like, here's a hot tub. What kind would you want? Like, what are you thinking of? Like, what size? And he's researching what kind. Do you know if you want chlorine, bromine, salt water? And I was like, I have literally only thought as far as hot tub would be nice.
I don't want to buy a new one because they're so bloody expensive.
We don't need to talk about a hot tub.
So anyway, all of that. So yeah, that's
all that to say. See, his brain's like, "Whoo, hot tub world." But it's something that I know about Luke is that if I, in a sense, fan a flame of something, like he's all in. Which is again a trust that I have with him is that if he's gonna try a thing, like he's gonna give it everything he's got, and he's gonna do it well. Like, he's gonna do it with excellence. And so I'm not worried about buying this machine and it's sitting in our basement and not being used because that's just not his character and not his personality. And so I have a high level of trust with Luke wanting to invest in something because he's clearly thought it through and he has had a track record of following through with this is what I say I'm going to do and I'm going to do it. Like that's
to speak back that a little bit. That doesn't mean that everything I've ever endeavored, everything I've ever bought has been like I've taken it to its end conclusion.
No, I think you're perfect. That's what I'm trying to communicate.
I've also had several things.
That's what I tell my kids. I've never made a mistake. They're like, whatever, Dad.
Yeah, when my kids catch me for having a mistake, I'm like, there, it finally happened.
Yeah, but when you say it 100 times, it's just like, it's an eye roll.
So where I was going with that is if I don't take it somewhere, I'm also a bit of a purger. I'm like, okay, that didn't work out. Let's move that on. It's taking up space. Yes. Let's wrap it up. Take it as a loss. Okay, and let's move forward.
Yes, you are a purger. That's true.
So one thing I wanted to touch on in regards to the laying out the sell to you about the sewing machine was that through that process, I'm like, if I got that machine, that could mean. And then my brain goes like full-blown tool belt business, selling tool belts all over the world. Potentially one day, maybe, draw that way back. I can serve my local little community well. And if it continues on, then I can buy some more equipment and it can just grow on its own. And I can just slowly pick my way along. But you zoom out and there's this big grandiose picture of like, how far will it go?
Yeah.
It could go to
Cool.
to here. But in the midst of it, I'm like, I'm not going to shoot for that. I'm not going to push for that. I'm not going to expect it or even hope for it. I'm just going to try and continue to be a good steward of the things that I have access to here and now. Try to respect the people around me, and it'll go where it goes. And we'll see.
Well,
And we're talking 2018, 17, 19. I met you guys in like 19, I think.
Well, 2018 is when we built the addition for the shop onto our house.
Wow.
Was that summer? So it must have been 16, 17 when all of this was happening. Because obviously if we build a shop, we're already committed. Yeah, and we had this machine by then. So yeah, it's more like 2016, 2017 that these conversations were being had. But I was going to say that with your construction company, something that I noticed too was you weren't trying to push to like be big, take on as much as you can. Like that was also never your MO. And so I wasn't worried that you were going to try to like unnecessarily push the growth of this in a way that was going to be unwise.
Yeah. And that's been something that I know that you and I have talked about, is because your approach oftentimes is like, let's set some goals. And I'm like, no, let me build systems. Let me build systems. Let me build a foundation, and we'll get where we get because we're supposed to get there, not because we like charge through and force ourselves to get there. And again, your approach to things is very typical, wise, business advice and motivation. Whereas for me, I'm so cautious to be like, no, I want to build as strong a foundation under it. And if it naturally gets there, it gets there. And that way, if it doesn't get there, I'm okay with it. Like I did the best I could.
More Field of Dreams mentality here. If I build it, they will come.
So to get back on track a little bit. She said yes.
I said yes.
Which then led to shop, clicker press. It kind of went from there, right?
But then it took, because a part of our, like we hadn't renovated our home yet. And so part of that was great because we had some of these weird spaces that used to be a kitchen in the downstairs and the storage room area. And so he was taking over pieces of it that we weren't really using at the time and making them shop. Like you had put in new cork flooring in that old kitchen and some of the things were convenient, like the stove. The stove plug-in, like that you would, special, this is where I don't know stuff.
The range plug,
the range plug that's more power or whatever was like suitable for a certain machine. And he was like, oh, this is super convenient. This is great. But you weren't like, we're going to need a shop.
No. And like the other thing too, once we bought that for sewing machine, now I'm like, okay, we've got the ball rolling. Now all of a sudden I'm actively looking like I need a clicker press, which is basically a machine that's got a cutting bed on it, a hydraulic head that you activate it. It comes down and it pushes an industrial cookie cutter through leather into the shape that you want.
Because that was the most painful part of the process, is cutting out the leather.
Yeah. And the slowest, all kinds of issues with that.
But so you have to commit to a design. So that's
that's a whole other
tipping point.
And it was like dyes and everything. It's like it's a whole thing.
But basically what I'm saying is that once we got that industrial sewing machine, like this is the first core element that I require. Now that I'm on this journey, now I actually kind of have a green light to pursue and try and find the other elements in the equipment realm that I would need to do this better and better. So now the ball's rolling. I'm like, now I'm going to actively look for a clicker press. And now I'm actually selling tool belts. I'm making some money and I'm investing that back into the company. And I'm looking for a clicker. I'm looking like crazy and like, okay, they're thousands and thousands of dollars. Well, then I find one on a classifieds listing in Toronto from a leather shoe manufacturer for $500 and they get gone by the end of the week. Well, I got to ship it. It costs a fortune. I call the guys like, it's a 240 volt or 3-phase 600 volt machine. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna call an electrician. I'll call you back. And I call my electrician. I'm like, there's this machine that would do what I want to do, but it needs just incredible power. Like, is this possible at a residential location? And he's like, long story short, yes, there'll be some fancy electrical equipment, but yes.
Just don't tell the district.
we can make it work. I'm like, okay. So then, pull the trigger on that and get those things coming. So that was kind of like, that the purchase of that harness stitcher was the kind of catalyst for me to like kind of put on a green light to start pursuing the rest and then trying to keep the reins held back to do it at the appropriate time, talk to you about, the growth of the company and how it's going and not get overextended and manage that.
And I think you were pretty excited about the things that you thought would be awesome in a tool belt. You're realizing that other people also was like the things you thought would be awesome in a tool belt, other people also were like, yeah, that would be super helpful.
Yeah.
And so that's motivating.
Super encouraging. I mean, to this day, when guys come into the shop that have worn, cheap tool belts off the shelf for 20 years, and they're like, okay, that's a tool belt, what's the deal with yours? I'll put this one on. Like, oh, this feels pretty good. Rafter square goes in here. Like, oh, I always drop that. That's nice. And your nail puller goes in, you're like, oh, that thing always rips my pants. That's great. And then I drop the stick nails into the stick nail sheath. And that's usually the moment I was like, I gotta have it. Because they're like, they always bend and break. I'm like, I know. That's why I did it, because I've always hated that. So like, I find solutions to these problems I've always had, and I'm preaching to the choir, and I'm a tradesman. Like that's super.
Well, it's satisfying. There's such. I mean, and then we saw that, not to jump to it too quick, but we saw that once we started actually showing it to people, right? It's like you were doing it on the job site, and then it was like, well, how do you show this to more people? And then as soon as more people started seeing it, we were like, whoa. Okay, people are gonna want this.
Yeah.
How do we?
Yeah. So then, like, I think the next kind of stage was I was helping you. We were taking picture. Oh no, we built. Sorry.
Well, the addition. Let's
the
talk
addition.
about that for a second. So we originally were gonna renovate to sell our house and build again.
Yeah. So we were thinking we would build a new house again. Being that you're a builder, it kind of is a natural thought. And so we started to look around at different properties in Summerland where we live, and it's such a beautiful place. We didn't want to move anywhere, but it's also a very hilly place. And so with your truck and trailer that you use for work, it actually eliminates so many properties. Just even being able to park a truck and trailer.
Oh, yeah.
When we even bought this place that we're in, we found that so many we just drive by and be like, nope, wouldn't work. Just crazy driveways and stuff. And so that now we still have that problem because you still running your construction company, but we also needed a property that either had a shop on it with a house we could renovate, or a property where we could build a house and a shop. Because at this point we're thinking it's going to be a home-based business. And how can we do this well?
So long story short, we basically woke up to the location that we were in was perfect already. Let's renovate to stay. Actually, for me, I'm like, means renovation. Oh no, but so be it.
Yeah.
And so then we made that decision to renovate to stay, which means then, garage, wood shop, leather shop space, and make it appropriate for us and our 4 kids.
And we built a shop that we thought was ridiculously large. Yeah. Considering he was in this little room in our downstairs. Yeah. We're like,
here's the next 10 years for sure. Easy.
This is so much space. This is crazy. Like this feels excessive that we're building this 1,000 square foot workshop, adding onto our home. This feels ridiculous.
I remember having that 1,000 square feet and then moving my tools into it. Like, this is so dumb.
It's just like in a corner.
I'm in a corner like
You're
this.
by yourself. Yeah.
And our kids are playing like hockey on the rest of it.
It was hilarious. So anyway, we can probably like skip ahead a little bit in that basically that business started to develop in that space. I ended up actually bringing on one of my framers from the job site to come work with me part-time at first, then full-time. There's 2 of us doing it. And we got to a place where now I'm like, okay, now I actually need to market or get exposure for these. So I think actually talking to your cousins about social media, that's kind of when that
I think
started.
before that, you were just going by word of mouth. And remember, we made up our own brochures, and you would load up some of your belts, the different designs that you had at the time, and you would go to some big construction sites. You went to the trade school in Kelowna, and you just were like, hey, can I show you my tool belts? And like you were kind of like a door-to-door salesman at construction sites for a little while, because that was seemed like the most convenient way to make sales or to have express interest or share. That's not the right words for that. But to find interest in your product. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Get exposure.
And I also drive up in my truck. That's an Akribis construction on it, custom framing company. And I'd go to the job sites, whether I'd made a phone call first to give them the heads up I'm coming by, or just show up and be like, hey guys, I'm one of you. I make tool belts. Is that interesting? And guys are like, oh, on a coffee break, we'll come down and have a look. And I'd sell the odd one, and it was kind of getting word out.
Yeah. But our back to the bookkeeping side, like our bookkeeping is super basic. I'm just using Excel to make invoices. And so we were pretty limited in even what the potential was for sales. It was basically limited to you in person making sales, or someone coming to our home, hearing about you and saying, hey, can I come by tomorrow night and have a look at your belts and purchase a belt? And then we'd do up an invoice on our computer. So there was this gaping void between what you were doing to sell a few locally to do we want to, the next leap was have this available online, have a website where people can actually find us online, order a belt, and we mail it to them, which was quite a steep, like a big hump to get over, because at this point, Luke has zero social media. No, thank you was his approach to social media. And neither of us are super tech savvy or have ever created a website before, anything like that. Yeah. And so now that he's got a little bit of efficiency, getting a bit better in the shop and some things in place and someone helping him out, he has the capacity and the space to start thinking about that next step. And so that's where your brain went next.
So then your cousins, that's when they helped me get social media set up.
Yeah, we went on a trip. We took our kids to visit some family in Quebec, and my cousins, who are, 12, 15 years younger than us, were like, you should be on Instagram, it was like 2019, I think. And they're like, yeah, you should totally get on Instagram. I bet you get so much exposure on Instagram and you could share stuff. People would love that. And so I had Instagram, but it's just a personal account. And so my cousin actually was doing business school, and so he helped him set up the account while we were there, actually, and gave him some tips and things. And so that was the beginning of that. Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. So then it basically came to a point where we were like, okay, what's the next step? We got a little bit of social media, see what that is, how that goes. And then I started thinking about, okay, the next kind of step for exposure is probably to get online. So I started thinking, okay, I did computer design in like grade 10 back in, would that have been 97?
Yeah, it doesn't count.
96? I don't think. It means nothing. So I started thinking, okay, how do I build a website? What's a template website I can use? I looked at Wix. I remember that's what comes to mind, Wix websites, and these are templates you can plug into. I'm looking at this stuff. I'm like, oh man, this is a huge can of worms. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, and usually when it came to computer stuff and like even invoicing and things, you were looking to me for help. I was the techie one, which I'm not techie. And you're like looking at me for a website. I was like, I got nothing. I was like, I got absolutely nothing to help you with this.
So through a friend of ours, I'd kind of asked around to a few kind of business friends and be like, I think I need to talk to somebody, get some advice.
I think it was just in a casual conversation, though. They were asking about your business and you're like, this is the next step I'm looking for. This is kind of what I've done. And this was a mutual friend of us and Mark that was like, my friend Mark is actually someone you should talk to.
Yeah. And so I ended up reaching out to Mark, and this was purely like, hey, this is this business thought that I have, and I need to do a website. What sort of a website should I build? What's your advice to me? Because our mutual friend, Bryn, like, you just call Mark and he'll point you in the right direction. He can give you some advice. So this is in no way, shape, or form me reaching out to actually get help with the business and the company website design. It's like, what are some websites? Like, what's the advice you can give me with how I do this? So I got in touch with you. So why don't we just kind of transition here now to that discussion, how that landed on you, and maybe even just to give it a background, give us like a 2-minute on who you are, what your background is, and your experience in your company.
Yeah. The funny thing is, so Bryn made that connection. He hadn't told me yet, so I got a phone call. I missed the call because I was like, I don't know this number. Click, it goes to voicemail. Hey, I'm Luke. I make some tool belts. It was kind of like, we run an agency and a film studio and we had a bunch of things going on. And so, we're working with like World Vision and like, this one organization, it's like the largest homeless shelter in Canada. We're trying to do these like big campaigns. And so so we're trying to do less of the like, one-on-one, single
redneck
business,
framer,
whatever.
Like,
which he wasn't even looking for. It was just like, hey, you're a guy who knows stuff. You got a few tips. Can I pick your brain for a minute? Was like his motivation for the call.
Yeah, and we had branded and built some like big custom builders in Edmonton and like worked with some bigger companies like locally like that, but mostly that. So when somebody's like, hey, I make tool belts in my basement, I was kind of like, I don't think that's a phone call that I'm going to take. Like, it sounds bad, but you know what I mean? You're trying to stay focused on your business.
Oh, it totally makes
if you
sense.
build like custom homes and someone's like, hey, I want to build like
birdhouse.
This. Yeah, you're like, no, I'm not into it. So that was kind of the first take. And then Bryn called me and he's like, hey, my friend Luke's been trying to get a hold of you. And then the way he said it is he's like, I actually think there's a good business there. And he knew that we had sort of set this new, trajectory with our company that was going to say, we're going to do fee for service for all this stuff that we're doing with big nonprofits like global NGOs and that kind of stuff. And then we're going to open up this like portfolio of companies we want to buy that we can help grow, because we know we're really good at this stuff, but we're doing it for nonprofit, and which we love. Like that's this part of this thing. You get to the end of the year and you're like, man, we're helping, homeless people get homes. We're getting water to people who don't have it. We're helping abused women get shelter, like all this kind of stuff. We're like, oh, that's what we want to do. But then you're like, yeah, but there's this skill set in the business that we just really like. It's fun. And whenever we work with these businesses, we see it's easier to get results too with business versus nonprofit. It's like tough. You have to tell deep stories, and you have to, it's a long haul for these big campaigns. And so anyways, we had made that decision. Bryn knew that. And I think he was like, I think there's a good business there. You should connect with him. It could be a portfolio opportunity.
Interesting.
Which
wasn't at all on Luke's radar.
I thought you knew that. So on our first phone call, I was kind of like, well, we'd be interested in taking this portion of the business, giving you all this. We'll build it all for free. Let's do this together and see where it goes. And there's shared risk and all that kind of stuff, right? And then I think for you, I'm assuming it was attractive because we're like, we have our lawyers, we've got this, our accountants. It was kind of like, we've got this infrastructure. You can just borrow it, or we can just provide it, and we can grab this thing and go. And on the back end, we're like, okay, well, we're going to tier it and level it and test it. So, after we met and then we kind of got into it, you had like 50 to 100 people on Instagram, it was like friends and family, right? And I was like, okay, so let's start posting this way, let's, maybe create a forum and post about it. And I remember the moment that it really clicked was when an account didn't have a huge following, it was like 25,000 or something, called Tool Belts, reposted a photo of one of the belts, and we gained like 5,000 followers like overnight. Do you remember that? It was like the first sort of boom, and it was like 100,000 views or something, and it felt so massive at the time. And then shortly after that, we opened a Squarespace landing page with a forum. It was like, we were in such like simple test mode. Let's just open it and say, hey, if you want to buy some of these, because I didn't want to break the system either. So, or go build this whole thing that wasn't going to work.
I'm totally by myself at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was kind of why we're like, we'll just put a little forum open and say, submit if you would like to order some of these, or like put in your, preferences, and we'll reach out to you, thinking you'd get 10 of these and you could chat with those people. And I remember you posted about it, we opened it, and then you called me right away, like seconds. It was like right away. You're like, shut it off. I was like, what? I'm like, what do you mean shut it off? You're like, no, like shut it off. It is, right, there's now. Too much, like shut it off. I'm like, whoop. It's like click off, sites off. Like, and then and then we kind of walked through like, hey, go on and say, hey, we kind of hit our maximum, and that was the beginning of the sort of like selling out. And I think it took 2-3 years that we kept just selling it. Like we couldn't hit the capacity fast enough. And I think it's a positive thing in a sense to the systems that you fought for to build something that's going to be sustainable. That's going to be, you pump the brakes on the growth side. Cause I think there's this other like mentality, the rah mentality that's like, you landed it, there's all this white space, go build 15 warehouses worth of this stuff and let's like tell the world, And I wouldn't, I'd be lying if I said there isn't a bit of that personality in me,
We see that in you.
Yeah, you see that in me, I know. But I've loved, it's been awesome just to kind of, pump the brakes on that part and actually build a really good, robust business that's from a lifestyle standpoint, from a business standpoint, I think is amazing, and it's actually doing some really good things. So, I mean, there's a lot more to that, but
I want to jump back to my perception of our first discussion.
Yeah, I'm so curious. Well, because we flew out to come see you too, right? So there was a point where we're like, hey, my brother and I hopped on a plane. We came out and saw the shop, saw the belts. We had heard you say, hey, I walk onto a job site and I sort of like sell 6 of these things that, So we had a sense, okay, number one in business is a good product. If you don't have a good product, walk away. Like it's just, you don't want to peddle. There's nothing worse than trying to peddle a product that's not good. And so that was our first intrigue. So like, hey, let's fly out.
Yeah. So in that first discussion. Again, I'm reaching out to get some advice on what kind of a website I should build, what my next business move maybe should be. What do I kind of do a storefront? Like, what do I do? And so from my vantage point, you were like, okay, explain your business to me a bit. And I kind of lay it out and explain that. And my sense was you're like, huh, that's interesting. Would you ever want help with that?
Like, that's what I'm calling. Or no.
Right?
You
so
thought
I'm
I
like,
was just going to give advice.
Yeah.
That was what I originally thought. So you're like, would you ever want like assistance and help with this?
Yeah.
And I was at that moment, I remember being like, oh, change gears here. Wasn't thinking this at all. I'm like thinking this is going to be a huge bunch of work I'm going to have to do. And this person can kind of point me in that direction. So when you're like, would you kind of want assistance with that? Is that something that interests you at all? Right away, I'm like, yeah, actually. So, and the reason that was appealing to me is that I have also, as much as I really enjoy taking things on, doing things myself, there are a select number of things I'm like, hard no. That's not my expertise, not my interest, not my skill set. So for instance, one thing I basically don't touch in any kind of renovation stuff is electrical. I'm like, no, I don't know how it works. I shouldn't know how it works. I'm going to burn the house down. I don't understand it all. Like try and get me to explain how a 3-way switch works. Not a clue. And I've been explained to you several times. It looks simple. Oh, I get it. And then 10 seconds later, it's gone. I don't retain that information. So when it comes down to like this whole other entity, this virtual world, online website, and someone's like, this is what we do. Is there any appeal to you? And like kind of allowing us to take that on. And there's some kind of a partnership. I was like, oh, I know the value in paying people to do what they do well. And I don't have this huge level of pride that means I've got to do it all myself. I actually see the value in collaborating as a team. I mean, on a job site when we're working, my favorite days are when we're framing walls and I'm laying out. I got my guy Chad cutting all the plates or cutting all the window packages and cripples, everything else. I've got 2 guys on nailers that are nailing behind. And as I get ahead with my layout, I'm sheeting. And we just like haul ass around each other. And so I really see value in everyone having their role and you work together as a team. Like that's where efficiency really starts to crank up. And so at that moment, a whole pile of things kind of went through my head. And I'm like, if this is the right person and they take partial ownership of things is what we can end up talking about. And they're responsible for this whole side of things that I have no expertise in whatsoever. Yes, I'm wanting to talk. I am interested.
And we went and met with a friend of ours, a business owner, because again, this kind of business is different completely than a construction company. And so we actually went and met with a guy that we respect and know, a business owner in town, and just said, hey, business-wise, like using your business sense, this is what's come up. Like, what's your gut reaction to this?
And very got savvy, wise guy.
Yeah, got some advice from him. And just so thankful to have people like that in our lives to be like, hey, can we just talk this through with you? Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Is there something we're missing like that we should be thinking about with this? So super thankful for people like that.
So basically with some good counsel and then after meeting and talking through those possibilities, then that decision was made like, okay, let's structure it this way. You're responsible for this. I'll keep doing this and we'll collaborate together and then we'll kind of see where it goes. And
in hindsight, it's pretty interesting how quickly some of that stuff developed because I remember we flew out and I remember just shaking your hand in your living room before we left. And it was kind of like, cool, let's do it. Yeah. That's kind of where it was at. And then of course we went and like, unanimous shareholder agreement, all the stuff that we knew was going to have to come after incorporation. There was no company technically,
it was
right?
Still just Luke Reamer, sole proprietor.
Yeah. So all that stuff, we kind of came in after that. And when I look at that in hindsight, I don't know, like it felt like stars aligned though in a sense. It didn't feel flippant. It didn't feel like, I think there was enough there, but I think I was like dead set committed at that time to be like, I'm not going to be a statistic, And so I think some of the commitments that I made to you that I was like, hey, I know that there's all this equipment that's in your name. It's expensive. It's been blood, sweat, and tears. You've got your reno, you've got all this stuff going on. There's, for your family, like being aligned, having a young family at the same time too. You guys had a young family. Oh, not as young, but anyways, mine was like young, and sitting in that moment and going, you know what, like 1,000% here are the commitments. Like you're gonna get everything you put in back before anything else, happens. We're gonna do this. And I remember just being like, that's and then to just serve and support and kind of be, just not fumble the ball on that.
Yeah.
Because that's the biggest thing. And like you hear all these statistics in business and they're all really true. Don't go into business with friends, family, blah, blah, blah. Well, my brother's my business partner. We've been able to debunk that one. That's been awesome. Like it's to this day, it's the best it's ever been. And so it's just people don't communicate. And I think I was really quickly able to see some of your character and the way you guys functioned, not being passive in the least and how important that is in any business relationship. You've talked about it previously in terms of like, that's how your construction business even grew. It was like, it was pretty simple. We just did what we said we would do. You know what I mean?
Shockingly,
and I think,
you get a great reputation that way.
Like shocker. But I mean, I don't know. It's interesting, but that was sort of where we were at, dead set on just saying, hey, we're going to commit to our word on this and see where it goes. And then I think, I wouldn't say caught lightning in a bottle in a sense, but the timing, what you were serving a need in the industry when, there wasn't a lot of, there weren't a lot of other players, and all that. It was exciting.
Came together well. And here we are, 4 years later?
Yeah.
Right? 4 years later.
3 and a bit.
And
4.
long gone out of the home shop into our new permanent facility with storefront, and things are up and rocking. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
You thought you'd be doing a podcast like 4 years ago.
No.
That's great.
Definitely
All right.
not.
Well, thanks so much, you guys, for the talk. We'll continue again in another episode. Thanks for watching, listening, and take care.